Welcome to the Barawan branch. This video outlines the construction of a pedestrian footbridge in metal and styrene. The branch junction is based on a prototype mainline location, although on the model the main lines finish just beyond the yard entry at the room wall. The primary purpose of the footbridge is to divert viewers' attention from the backdrop at the end of the layout. But I also wanted it to contribute to the station scene, so it needed to be prototypical. I briefly considered making it from styrene but wasn't sure if it would be sturdy enough to withstand the yearly temperature extremes. So I opted for metal construction. Let's look at the prototype bridges that inspired the model. First, the Terrena footbridge crossed a double-track mainline at the time in which my layout is based. Note the curved lateral braces for the railing on the bridge and the stairways. Next, Wallerawang footbridge once crossed the double-track mainlines as well as an extensive goods yard. The lateral braces for the railings are straight on this bridge. I began by making the towers from styrene. I used H-section for the columns, channel for the horizontals and strip for the diagonal bracing. The assembled units are quite strong, stable, and well able to support the metal bridge. I first sprayed them with a solvent-based coat of rust, followed immediately with an uneven coat of weathered black. The result is a predominantly black structure with patches of surface rust, as can be seen on the prototype. The subframe is made from square brass tube. At this point, I was planning to hide this subframe within a styrene superstructure, but making this rekindled my enjoyment of scratch building with metal. So I decided to use metal, predominantly brass. I made the bridge during the early COVID lockdowns, which made sourcing materials difficult and expensive. One item I was unable to obtain was flux, so I used rosin core solder. Thus many of the joints needed to be finished with files and grinding tools. I made a balsa jig for the bridge railings. The jig allowed me to solder 4 diagonals to the horizontal rails at a time. I then repositioned the assembly to fix the next 4 diagonals. The photo shows the first of the second set of diagonals in place. I used 0.8 mm square brass rod for the horizontal rails and 1 mm angle for the diagonals. The horizontal rails were cut to the span length. The railings around the stairwells, above the towers, were made separately as their diagonals were at different lengths and angles compared to the span railings. The next task was to make the lateral braces for the span railings. I chose to use straight braces, as at Wallerawang. I couldn't source the correct sized angle, so filed some larger angle down to size. Prototype bridge railings were lined with wire mesh, virtually impossible to see at any distance, let alone 87 meters. However, the model looked bare without something to represent the mesh. I have seen wedding veil used to represent chain link mesh, but COVID lockdowns prevented a trip to explore that particular avenue. Instead, I opted for very fine etched brass mesh, a bit hefty, but not outlandishly so. I used 1.5 mm nickel-silver angle to represent the handrail atop the railings. It also concealed the top edge of the mesh that was sweated to the railings. Next up were the stairs. There was no way that I could include an entire stairway on either station platform. So the issue was whether to set the footbridge hard up against the backdrop, or to set it slightly away. Ultimately I set it far enough away to fit 5 steps between it and the backdrop. Nonetheless, I also built an entire stairway for off-layout display. I used brass angle for the steps. I made a jig of scale lumber to set the steps at the correct height relative to each other. The stringers are C-section brass. A strip of nickel-silver angle was added behind the top step. The angle is attached to the subframe top and side. The handrails and posts were soldered to the top of the C-section. I used the same jig to make the step sets by adding and securing steps, one at a time, at the lower end of the jig. I then fixed each full set of steps into a prefabricated frame comprising C-section stringers and angle ends. Another jig was made to hold handrail posts in place and square while being soldered to the stairway. I made the decorative curved handrail braces by bending heated brass angle around a handmade former. Both sets of stairs have been joined to the short level section above the central tower. A brass subfloor is yet to be added to that section. Scale lumber strips will be laid across the subfloor. I'd been cleaning the solder joints as I went. Now was the time to check for and remove any stray material. The first step was to scrub every part of the structures with an abrasive cleaner. Then thoroughly rinse with clean water. Finally, allow it all to air dry in a dust-free case. I airbrushed a light coat of etch primer on everything and left it 24 hours before airbrushing weathered white over the stairway railing. I gave this several days to dry and harden before masking the stairway railings and applying light coats of rust and weathered black. I tried to keep the coats very light to keep the mesh as fine as possible. I glued pre-stained scale lumber strips on the top side of a thin styrene subfloor. Underneath, I used scale strips of styrene to represent the deck timbers and bracing. The underfloor was airbrushed with dirty black. When I placed the model on the layout, the towers looked too chunky, so I replaced them with ones made of smaller section styrene. The visual result is much better. Thanks for watching.